Started my first startup in '97. The world told me I was insane.
Our goal is creating future economies that are more regenerative and sustainable.
Something didn't match up. Why hasn't this become the next big thing? And that's where we invested.
The whole purpose of achieving anything in life is measurement.
This panel today is obviously how can we rapidly decarbonize multi-housing. It's led by Robert Cooper at Embue, CEO of Embue. I will let you all introduce yourselves, but primarily today, the overall topic of this panel is carbon emissions must be reduced rapidly across every sector of the real estate industry. Multifamily is a particular challenge because of the variety of building types and ownership structures. So today's panel will discuss how we're going to decarbonize multifamily housing, and in particular, how owners and developers deploy new technologies faster than they ever have before. So our panelists come from finance, development management, and the startup world, and are ready to tackle these questions. So I'm really excited about learning more in the session today. And if anyone has any questions towards the end, we'll be able to have a Q&A for all of the panelists. So please add them to the Q&A chat section or the chat section so that we can review them towards the end of this panel. And then with that being said, Robert, I will hand it off to you. And as soon as, if we want to give another minute for Donnel to hop on, we can. Otherwise, we can go ahead and get started. And as soon as he joins, we'll make sure he connects in.
So thanks a lot, Manav, and welcome everybody. Really excited about this panel discussion. We've got a great set of speakers, panelists that really are at all sides of this. All sides of this problem and actively trying to solve it. So let me just kind of frame the situation here. So, why would we want to decarbonize multifamily buildings and buildings in general? So we have a problem. Buildings are responsible for 39% of carbon emissions worldwide. And actually we have another problem, which is specifically in multi-housing. In the US, 43% of households had trouble paying the energy bills, and this is even before COVID. And that means they missed one bill a year, or had to forego something else like food to make the heat stay on. And then we actually have a third problem, which is, again, somewhat particular to multifamily and multi-housing, which is there's a lot of manual processes in multi-housing. Which makes it impossible to kind of shape energy load and connect buildings to the grid and interact in a way that's also going to help lower carbon emissions. So with that framing, we have a responsibility, but also an opportunity. And that opportunity is to make the grid 100% renewable, make it carbon zero. Coupled with that, at the same time, make buildings use electricity as their only energy source, so decarbonize those buildings. And then to tie the two of those together, we need to create smart buildings that work with the grid to shape energy and power usage. Now, as I mentioned, we've got some great panelists working at this from different sides of the problem, from the ownership side, from the startup side, and kind of from the owner's representative side. But before we get to that, you've got to learn about me. So I'm a co-founder and CEO at Embue. We have a whole building intelligence platform that makes apartment buildings smarter and more profitable to run, and at the same time helps their owners and the occupants reduce their energy usage and carbon emissions. I wanted to go to around each of the panelists and let them kind of introduce themselves and frame their approach to this problem. So Darren, would you like to go next?
Sure. Well, hello, everyone. I think with a small group today, we could treat this less as a presentation, more as a discussion. As an introduction, my name's Darien, Crimmin, based in Boston, work for a company called WinnDevelopment. Not the casino developers, but the multifamily development company. Winn Companies has been around for 50 years, and we are one of the nation's largest and most I like to think most progressive multifamily developers focused on affordable housing. We are in 23 states. We have 115,000 apartments under management. So big portfolio. My focus over the past few years, really almost 15 years, has been developing out Winn's sustainability strategy and focusing on building efficiency, innovation in the sustainability space, renewables, figuring out how to not just save energy, but save money. And more recently, really look at our carbon intensity. And from my perspective, we really have, and Robert laid out in the intro, but we really have two realities. We have the reality of a property developer, a multifamily manager, where we have the financial budgets, the financial pro forma and the operating, income and expenses of a property that need to be managed like any real estate, like any business. And then we have another reality, which is the fact that, buildings are responsible for 40% of our carbon emissions, and it's a big problem we have to solve. And it's not going to solve itself. And the reason it's not going to solve itself is because, as of today, there's no clear financial correlation between deep carbon savings and the investment needed by building owners or operators to get there. We've been, good stewards of our properties, focused on efficiency for the past decade at least. And we know, LED lighting and, basic air sealing and insulation work really well. That can get you 10, 15, 20% savings. But really, when we think of decarbonizing buildings, especially existing buildings, we're talking about the need to reduce carbon emissions by 50%, by 60%. And that requires a totally different approach. It's really, a whole building, holistic, deep energy retrofit, or an approach that really focuses on the envelope of a building, the facade, the windows, the ventilation of a building, including new heat recovery. And then once you do that, you can think about electrifying the heating and the domestic hot water within multifamily. But until you really focus on the envelope, we're not really gonna get there with existing buildings, especially in cold climates. And the challenge is that type of integrated, technical, deep energy retrofit of existing multifamily is really expensive. It costs between $30,000, $40,000, $50,000 per apartment, more in some markets like New York City. And the economic justification from just an energy perspective, the energy savings that we might achieve is maybe $1,000 per unit. And so depending on the size of the property, we might save $50,000 or $100,000 per year for a capital investment of $2, $3, $4 million. And that math just doesn't work. So we are vested and interested in really figuring this out. It is the future. There's a lot of dynamics and a lot of nuances. But as a property owner, manager, and a recovering ecologist, as I like to say, we definitely are looking for solutions, and those could be technology solutions, but I really think they're financial solutions. We have the technology to save energy and to reduce carbon in buildings. We know from a building science perspective how to do it, and it's really a financial challenge at this point.
Thank you, Darren. Fantastic track record at Winn Companies. Eileen, would you like to go next?
Oh, sure. Hi, my name is Eileen Mason. I'm very happy to be here today. And I guess I'd like to start with a question as we think about approaches to decarbonization. And I'd like to just ask, I don't know if people can enter information into the chat, but if you can, what do you think is the biggest barrier to rapid decarbonization? I just ask people, I know we have many, Darien just mentioned financial, but I'd just like to have you think about that for a couple of seconds here. And it looks like people are not able to enter into the chat. So I'll just move forward. I'd like to suggest that the biggest barrier, or one of the biggest barriers to decarbonization, is habit. So across the country, across the world, people are recognizing the need to address climate, to do more, to do things more rapidly. And I think what gets in the way is that our whole energy system is based on entrenched habits. So whether you're an owner, an installer, a designer, financing entity, a policymaker, we all operate through habit. That's how we do it. That's how it's always been done. That's how we measure. That's how we cost. That's how, these are the carrots. These are the sticks in our system. It's what everyone knows how to do. It's, we know what our role is, and we're all comfortable in the way things operate now. And it's really hard to break these systemic habits, but it's what we need to do. And I don't mean to trivialize the size of the task ahead of us by using the word habit, but I really do think we need to look at how do we value things? What do we value? How do we cost things? How do we operate? How do we install projects? Who are we hiring? All of those kinds of questions need to be answered. And when people operate in new ways, then good things start to happen. So I would just suggest and frame it that way as an approach. And Robert, if you could go to my next slide. I'll take a minute and just introduce myself. My name's Eileen Mason. I have a background in engineering and business. I started Rethinking Power Management in 2009 to help organizations reduce their carbon emissions and hopefully mitigate the impact of climate change. We act as in-house sustainability consultants, helping organizations develop sustainability plans and projects. And what we're engaged in now is really trying to integrate more embodied carbon and resilience planning and those kinds of broader, more holistic views of energy savings as we develop plans and projects. Our engineers frequently introduce new technologies as part of that, and it's with that thinking in mind that I'm happy to be here at today's discussion. Robert, I think you're muted.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Eileen. And what I've always been impressed with RPM is the way you're integrated with the decision-making process with your clients. Robert, would you like to go next?
Sure. You can go to the next slide. So my name is Robert Shepard. I've been in the affordable housing space actually since about 2000, and commercial real estate since 84. Sorry, not that early. I wish it was, but 89. And really for the last period of time in the affordable housing have been focused on the capital side of things from a recapitalization, investment sales, financing world, and recently left CBRE with a kind of reawakening into the reality that we need a new investor paradigm when it comes to the decarbonization of the multifamily space. Affordable housing went through this when we initially launched our business, and as many know, the affordable housing space was kind of a space where you built and held and didn't actually have a velocity of transaction way back in the day, and that's changed. And I'd like to think we were an active part of that. And my impression on where we sit today, being fairly new to the decarbonization climate space, is that it's in the transition phase today of historical perspectives from an investor standpoint to what is everyone's been alluding to here, the costs associated with deep decarbonization are not economic. They are economic actually if you want to value those things that are non-financial, which are the impacts of climate change. And if you take those into consideration, which more and more, I wouldn't say there's many, but there are more and more investors that are starting to create value models where the impacts of climate and the mitigation of climate is becoming part of their valuation chain. I wouldn't say it's prevalent today, but it is something that through education, through clarity, through case studies, through demonstrations, I think we can change the paradigm. And that's what, I'm aiming to do in my new initiative, which does not have a name yet. So therefore it's the Sheppard Group. Anyway, that's who I am. That's what I'm echoing what Eileen and Darren have said, that there is a need in the space that is both financial as well as technical. And I think it's something that if the entire organization or ecosystem is focused on, that we can get there.
Thanks very much, Robert. And yeah, it's really good to hear your perspective from really somebody that essentially created the financing vehicles we have today in affordable housing. Danelle, do you want to go next? So we're just introducing ourselves and kind of framing where you come to this problem. Danelle, looks like you're muted.
Looks like we lost Donnel. Maybe he has to log back in.
I was trying to unmute him, but I think that made him go away. So, wow, I won't do that again. Danelle, you want to try unmute him? Wonder if Manav is still here.
I am. Yes.
So are we able to unmute him?
Yeah, on my end, it's not showing that he's muted. So I think it's something on his PC.
I see him as muted.
Yeah, when I try to hover around unmute, it just gives me the option to mute him, not to unmute him. So.
Oh, so let me try to hit the unmute button again. So I've hovered and I'm going to hit the unmute button. Nope, that didn't do anything. Wow, that's interesting. Wow. Would you recommend Donnel leaves?
Donnell, if you can hear us, if you go into your settings, the little setting button at the bottom, can you just confirm what your mic is turned on and available? So it should give you the option to turn on microphone, or if you're using an AirPod or anything.
While Donnell's trying to get connected, I don't know him well, but Donnell leads a group called BlocPower that's trying to install electric heat pumps in multifamily housing based in New York City. I won't try to give him an introduction beyond that, but I know he's doing great work.
Yeah, I think his Twitter handle is making buildings into Teslas. So kind of on theme here. So while
I think that's actually that's actually a good discussion point. I've been doing a lot of policy work in DC and trying to advocate really for tax credits to drive building efficiency. Specifically, this idea of like I mentioned, a deep energy retrofit where you're saving 50% of a building's carbon. It's really expensive, and so we need some level of policy, government support as an intervention in the market, because the price signals aren't there. They're not going to drive that investment if the return isn't there. Treating buildings like Teslas is interesting because in the proposed reconciliation bill, we have a tax credit for $12,500 to buy a new electric vehicle, and EVs cost maybe 50 grand. And the same bill, right, for buildings is proposing a $2,500 tax credit for energy efficient buildings, energy efficient homes, I should say. A new home is $500,000 at least, right? it's an order of magnitude off when we think about that policy. And so I like the idea of treating buildings, trying to modernize them, but we definitely need to also bridge the gap with good policy. And that's just one example, but the potential for the federal government in particular to support decarbonizing the real estate sector, I think is necessary.
So kind of a basic question is, why do we need to do all this energy efficiency stuff anyway? Can't we just electrify, electrical resistance, heat pumps, air conditioning? Why don't we just go for it?
Blow our grid up?
I could try to answer that. I definitely have natural gas in my house. And I like to be warm and comfortable up in the, New England winters. I think in order to convert to a electric heat pump and still maintain comfort, you really need to focus on the building envelope. You really need to make sure you have at least R30 walls that are really tight and, good windows that are new and that function well and close well. And then when you, again, tighten up a building envelope, you have to think about ventilation, even single family homes. And so I'd say all those are precursors to just flipping a switch and electrifying buildings, electrifying the heating. That's obviously up for debate, and it's obviously different in different climates, right? In California or, down in different climate zones, there's less of an emphasis on heating. Obviously, cooling is more important down south, but in cold climates, I would argue that we can't just electrify existing buildings at the flip of a switch.
I would contend, Robert, there's a couple things here. Also, there's you've got, as the grid, cleans up, you're going to end up having your power source, be cleaner eventually, hopefully. But even there, you still have, so you have operational carbon, obviously, which is a lot of what we've been talking about. But you have embedded carbon as well. And I'll give you an example. In the city of Seattle, the carbon footprint for the city is 85% embedded carbon. That's simply because we run on hydro mostly, like the vast majority. So, yeah, I believe you have to come at this from both perspectives. And getting to Darren's point on the deep decarbonization of the envelope, well, at that point of doing the envelope, the windows, the roof, etc., we obviously need to be using sustainable materials that don't have embedded carbon, so that we can, or as low embedded carbon as possible, so that we can be overall reducing the carbon footprint of the buildings. And to do that, you do need incentives, both from, I would say from the federal side. You also need regulations from the local side, or some sort of combination where you have a limit on your carbon, footprint as a building. So, I think you're going to have incentives early and penalties late.
Eileen, you had a comment as well.
Yeah, I was going to make one other comment, building on what everyone is talking about. But also, it's really important to reduce your load as much as possible as you look to design and size your new electric system. So a lot of buildings really have limited electric capacity, and being able to connect to the grid or expand your connection to the grid can sometimes be problematic. So looking at your envelope and really controlling your ventilation system allows you to decrease the size of the system that you're going to be installing, and really can help bring costs down to some extent.
Very good, thank you. Danelle, would you like to kind of introduce yourself, and you can probably jump into the discussion we were just having, which is why do you need to do energy efficiency and ventilation? Why can't you just electrify everything the way buildings currently are?
I think that electrifying multifamily buildings, as everyone has said, is incredibly difficult, but what an extraordinary business opportunity for folks who can figure it out. We're super excited about some of the stuff we're seeing from like Mitsubishi and other folks out on the market who are innovating in the hot water space so that you can actually decarbonize the whole building. And with Governor Hochul's announcement yesterday that we're going to get clean electricity into New York City, it's really exciting. When you electrify buildings in New York City, including apartment buildings, you can just take the whole thing off fossil fuels entirely and really move that building to all electric, and that's incredible. I think that labor costs are really part of the primary challenge here, and the cost has to do with the inexperience of our labor pool and the undersupply of skilled construction workers across America. There's a Times article last week that outlined, look, there's just a shortage of highly skilled construction workers across the country. So whether it's building new homes or decarbonizing multifamily buildings, the kind of electricians and plumbers that you're going to need to do all of this work are in short supply. And so labor prices have skyrocketed along with the shortage of raw materials and, you know, stuff that we need along the supply chain. So I actually think cost to the customer right now is the biggest barrier, as was mentioned by the folks from Win, and figuring out how to make these things cost competitive, but also figuring out how to really communicate the real value of decarbonization to building owners so that even if it's not cost competitive, well, look at all the other stuff that you're getting along with your decarbonization. Your building's gonna be healthier. Hopefully it's gonna be more valuable. There's all this stuff that you get. And so because you're getting more, yeah, you gotta pay more than you do for a fossil fuel system. So I think there's also a marketing problem alongside that construction services problem. So I'll stop there. I don't know if those have been mentioned.
No, that's a really good point about these co-benefits, because, you know, getting back to making buildings into Teslas, you know, it's cool to buy a Tesla. It's a fantastic car to drive, so I'm told. I haven't actually driven one, and so people feel, you know, really good about that, and you know, that's part of the package. And I got to say, now, I just recently moved into a, you know, efficient envelope home with heat pumps and you know, mechanical ventilation with a heat exchanger, and it's wonderful. I mean, it's just a very, very, very pleasant experience. And I'm on a busy street, and I don't care, because I also don't hear the planes and trains and automobiles around my house. So I think we do have a marketing problem, and maybe we have a marketing problem with politicians who think that $2,500 is great for a house and $12,500 is great to buy a car as a subsidy.
Yeah, I mean, I'd say it's more than marketing, guys. I mean, there's dollars associated with that. A healthy building, you know, that when you have better air in the building, it's an economic thing too, right? And I think the issue there is that, you know, a lot of this is new information, fairly recent studies, et cetera, and it has not been digestible. I mean, I come at it from the investor perspective, right? And I mean, I have spent, you know, I'm lucky enough to quote unquote retire, you know, and I've spent the last 9 months digesting, actually almost 12 months, digesting every study out there. And I got to tell you, it's not accessible. It's not easily digestible. It's not known, right? So, you know, it's as simple as, you know, LED lights. Now you'd think every single multifamily owner in the country would have LED lights versus fluorescent. Well, that's not true. It's not, I mean, these are as simple and as layup as that. So it gets to super clean, clear, digestible information delivered that has to do with both the energy efficiency, but also really the intangible benefits, you know, that we're talking about that quote unquote don't have a dollar associated with them, but really do. And clean air costs you less than dirty air, from a tenant retention, from a kid having less asthma to, you know, staying in school longer. Well, that all has value to the owner if you can actually distill it to something that they can consume.
Yeah, Allen and Maycomer have been doing a lot of studies. I don't know if you've come across them, Robert, but have been doing a lot of work in that area, trying to quantify the health benefits and the educational benefits and all of that of having a better, cleaner, better building. But it's really in its infancy. That work is really in its infancy. And I think from a broader perspective, it hasn't been obviously incorporated into the algorithms that we use for developing, for valuation of various things. And I think the cost of carbon, I would put in there as well, really looking at the true cost of carbon and giving that a real value in society.
Yeah, I mean, look at the social cost of carbon, what's $51 or something metric ton right now. And realistically, under simple math, there was a study in the last few weeks that talks about it should be 258 if you include, mitigated deaths from climate effects, and that's only having to do with heat, right? And if you include flood and food issues and climate, all the stuff associated with it, you're going to get way higher than that. So it's just a reality that we aren't really valuing the mitigated impacts that deep decarbonization can bring to the world, really.
Yeah, I agree. There's a valuation problem of these co-benefits, and I mean, if you look at something as simple as carbon offsets, we've greened 1,200 multifamily buildings, right? We haven't decarbonized all of them, but we've done energy efficiency in all of them in the last few years, and it's a lot of carbon and avoided carbon emissions and greenhouse gas emissions. And we can't get the damn things valued by Vera or whoever because the process is just so boutique and expensive and flawed. And it's also inaccurate and wrong. I mean, most of the valuations of carbon offsets from forestry in California, I mean, the forests are burning down for one. And second, even if they weren't burning down, they were fraudulent in many instances. And so the whole carbon offset, which should allow us to value some of these additional co-benefits, right? At least, even if from a social status standpoint of, hey, like I've decarbonized my home and I have all these offsets and I'm going to donate some of them to my church or community or family or whatever, so that there's kind of a social networking benefit to all. We can't do any of that stuff because all of the processes are so fragmented by which we value. I also think that public health systems under, Obamacare and et cetera should be doing preventative healthcare investments. And so we've been digging into healthcare providers and insurers who are willing to invest in apartment buildings where they have an extraordinarily high number of chronic asthmatics who are in and out of the emergency room, which is terrible for the kids and their families, but also really expensive for the emergency room. And so if you can keep folks out of the emergency room by reducing asthma and by decarbonizing buildings and making them healthier, bringing down overall healthcare costs for our population, how do you value that public health co-benefit and actually have healthcare providers pay in? So that's one of the things we're testing out in the Bronx, where we were yesterday with the EPA administrator. But anyway, I couldn't agree with Robert more that these valuations of co-benefits are critical.
I think this is really where the rubber meets the road because, again, from a private landlord, building owner, building manager perspective, we have to take a very specific, particular approach to how we're going to finance whatever it might be. Could be an energy project, could be a new roof, could be a kitchen makeover, whatever it is. And the cost of carbon and the potential for a cost of carbon to solve the imbalance that currently exists related to how to actually finance deeper carbon reductions, these types of projects where we know we can technically achieve a carbon outcome, a pathway to decarbonize existing buildings. We know the technology needed to do that. From a project perspective or a building owner perspective, though, the disconnect is financial, and valuing these social costs in a way that a property owner can access is critical. And so if it is the social cost of carbon, and Robert, I like what you said, because maybe it is $51. I don't know how that gets valued in real life. It actually would depend on different markets, different programs, whatever it might be. In general, in the free market, though, I don't think the United States is at a real cost of carbon anywhere. Even though Biden's been alluding to more accurately proposing that, and different states have different paradigms. But if you were to capture the social value of carbon mitigation, and let's say it is $250 a ton, that's pretty close to what it needs to be at the project level for an owner to finance a deeper retrofit to achieve a carbon output, a carbon reduction result, and still sort of maintain the cost payback model, which is what drives investment, anywhere. And so I think there's real opportunity to push for that and to really get consensus, not just in multifamily, but across real estate, across the whole economy, to think about how we decarbonize. Because the alternative is not pretty. The alternative is we're just going to end up with a bunch of discombobulated regulations that propose fines and sticks and penalties for building owners or polluters that are disjointed and cumbersome and may lead to just dysfunction. I think that's a real potential path, and we're seeing signs of that as the federal government. This is a policy angle, but the federal government, if they don't act, then it's going to be state or even local governments that feel like they have to impose emission standards or emission fines for buildings that pollute too much, basically. And without a more comprehensive solution, I don't see local laws that fine building owners as an effective solution.
Well, let me just add to this quickly, because I'm what we call an old millennial. I'm an old millennial, and we are about the business of cryptocurrency, and it's us and the Gen Zers. And for all of its faults, and it's totally fraudulent, and the whole thing's a mess. This idea of you as 2 or 3 private sector entities can come up with a digitized transaction where you value a set of benefits or currency or collateral. I don't see why we, as people who care about apartment buildings, and we work with Salesforce, we work with Apple, Google, Microsoft, they all purchase a ton of carbon offsets. I'd love it if they would agree to purchase carbon offsets at some of the pricing that Darien outlined, to say, look, we know that these apartment buildings, there's 5 million of them. They need to be green. They need to be decarbonized, and it's hard. And so we're going to pay in to green low-income apartment buildings down the street from the Apple store or whatever, and or the warehouse, the data center, and we're going to purchase the offsets. And not only does it is it greenhouse gas emissions reductions, it's local air pollution reductions or this or that. I just think that there's these kinds of corporate transactions that we can do between multifamily building owners and corporations that generate PR goodwill, but that can kind of set a new precedent for transactions. And if we digitize all and store all of the data on a third-party ledger like the blockchain, why do we need to fly in a consultant from the United Nations in Sweden or something to value the carbon offsets of an apartment building which is green in the Bronx, right? We can contribute the data according to a verified open source protocol that we all agree on as building owners and corporations that care about this stuff. And we can start to do our transactions. We don't have to call it a cryptocurrency, but the economic theory behind it would be similar. So that's my radical proposition.
No, and what I think is interesting about that is, there's a lot of things we don't do so great in this country compared to, we look at trends in Europe and even in Asia. But one thing the DOE has done a good job of is actually collecting building data through portfolio managers. We actually have tons and tons of historical data, and then with smart building, we have very, very fine-grained data going forward. So let's imagine that we have a higher price on carbon, we have some better financing vehicles. We're making it now worthwhile and getting in people's mindsets about making these changes. Even with that all in place, every real estate owner and developer in the country of multi-housing is going to have to do things differently and do it quickly. And it could be different financing mechanisms. It's putting in heat pumps if they don't, know what cold climate heat pumps are. It could be all of the other things that are talked about. They've really got to change what they're doing. And, they're going to be buying from vendors maybe they didn't buy from before. They're just going to be changing a lot of things. How does that happen quickly? What are some of the things that go through a real estate owner's mind or a real estate developer's mind when they're doing a project that would get them over the hump of, okay, I'm going to try this new thing in this new development?
Yeah, I think that's where you need some major industry associations behind it, and you need you got two components here. One, you got the marketing issue, which is the industry associations, the big players, etc. And in the major metro areas, the small apartment associations. You're going to have those groups on board, because they don't listen to NMHC or whoever. They listen to the City of Seattle Apartment Association or whatever. You need those two components, and then you have the issue that Donnel brought up. You have an execution issue, and you need to have trained people capable of executing on the actual plan that you're now, under your scenario, have financed, have people supporting, and therefore the owners have knowledge of it, and now they have to actually have an ability to execute it.
One of the things that, and I realize this isn't a total societal solution, but as we look at funds that are available for market transformation, because that's really what we're talking about here, how we value. I think in addition to valuing carbon, we also have to value maintenance and technical training for installers and that kind of thing. But if we look at the funds that are available through incentive programs, it's $10 billion a year or something like that across the US and Canada. If we could incorporate the societal cost of carbon into their algorithms for providing incentives, and something that I've been talking with them about, which is requiring training for installers of heat pumps through their programs. Perhaps it's a higher incentive or some way to require training and better installations for the equipment we do. Because another big issue that we haven't talked about is we have proposed savings, but we actually have to realize the savings. And actually realizing the carbon savings is very much dependent on the workforce and how they're installing things. So making sure that as we look at this picture of valuation, we have to value the people that are being trained to develop, install, maintain these kinds of systems that are going to be required going forward. And I think being able to task utility money to help in that transformation would be really beneficial.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. Yeah, so just help me a little bit more from kind of the real estate owner's point of view. There's just so much complexity in, developing a property, so much complexity in running it. And I know, our customers are just incredibly busy, and if we don't hear from them, that's a good thing, because, generally there's just a lot of stuff going on. This is going to take a little bit, even if it's free, it's going to take a little bit more of their time, and it's different from what they've done before. Is it just bigger carrots that's going to make that happen, or is there some sort of behavioral change, that organizational change that we need to undertake in these companies? What is going to kind of move the needle, getting the people, the real estate owners that aren't on this panel, that aren't thinking about this so much, getting them on board?
I think I think there's sort of micro things in a given organization that'll drive change, but from a macro perspective, I don't think we can avoid paying attention. I think the changes that we're going to experience in the next decade are going to be incredible. I I see the writing on the wall. You know, I believe in science. I'm a scientist at heart, and I don't think we're going to keep progressing with blinders on. And so I think, you know, collectively, we're going to have to solve problems, and they're going to, you know, the solutions are going to present themselves in different ways, but, you know, I think it's going to be inevitable.
I think part of this is going to come from the capital side of things. I mean, you're going to go to refinance your building, and your bank's going to say, well, what have you been doing? You know, what's your plan to get your, you know, your carbon footprint to X? You know, now you need to have the pressure on the banks. You need the ESG investors to crank it up. You need, you know, continue. It's a cycle here, right? But we need that pressure coming from the ESG space that forces the financing institutions to be asking the questions that are defined. And it, you know, right now it's just so opaque, you know, as to what's happening where. You need a very clear, like, this is your carbon footprint that you need to be at by X year or whatever, you know, something that's very clean and clear, so that you get, you know, Fannie and Freddie are going to get there. I don't know when, but it's not going to be that long in the future. I don't know if it's 5 years, 3 years, 6 years, whatever. It's going to be out there. And that's simply because who buys their bonds, right? And, you know, that's going to be where it's going to get driven. Well, all of a sudden that's, you know, I mean, it's about 80% of the affordable housing space, you know, and it's going to be, you know, it's bigger and bigger. The small space is where you're going to have the challenge, right? You know, and there's a lot of small multifamily, and that's where you have a lot of financing that occurs very over long spaces of time. You know, the holdings are longer, et cetera. But you can create the momentum through the larger, you know, and more active financings and sales. But you need the ESG space to push it.
Very good. So I guess the final question I had was, I run a startup. Donnel, you run a startup. Danielle, what's been your experience in having real estate owners buy from a startup, whether they're large owners or small owners? What are some of the things that have been success factors in your business?
I mean, at this point, we've been around for 8 years, and I think apparently in the real estate industry that matters. Folks want to see longevity. They are not on board with the Silicon Valley kind of boom bust, fly by night, fake it till you make it, you know, Theranos. No one wants a Theranos in their building, right? And so real estate folks are really savvy. They're also used to dealing with contractors who, you know, have like nonsense embedded into their business models, obviously. And so I find that, you know, focusing on developing trust and building up credibility of our firm with building owners is always helpful. And, you know, if something goes wrong with one of our projects, could be 4 years after we could be long gone, we'll show up and fix it. And those kinds of investments we find are critical in a late in an industry that is late to adopting technology, right? And so that's what we found. What about you, Robert? What have you found?
Very, very, very similar, actually. Yeah, the more years you got on the clock, the more they think you're going to be around, and they know that you're around to come fix things. And the one other thing I would say is, the industry is slow to adopt, but it has a lot of fast follower behavior. So we've just been really surprised how quickly newer customers have, rapidly, done multiple buildings. And the reason is they were waiting, to see what we did with those early adopters. And so that's sort of the silver lining on the late adoption. But yeah, I think it's a lot to do with being there through, kind of thick and thin. Often, I find that our team are the ones that'll come and fix the problem if the contractors have done something wrong, or somebody else has done something wrong, and that just builds a lot of trust. Eileen, it looked like you were going to say something.
Oh no, I'm just agreeing. I think as a provider in this space, not an owner, I think what we see is that the organizations that really stand behind their product and with their customer are the ones that have longevity. And I'm going to say, looking not only, as you just said, Robert, not only at whatever your equipment is doing and glitches that may occur with your equipment, but also seeing how it interacts with other equipment or other outcomes from installing the equipment that may not be caused by it, but that are problematic for the owner, and really helping them work through any of those things really helps them end up with a better building and makes them feel better about the technology that they're installing.
Very, very good. So, Manav, I didn't see any questions in the Q&A. Were there any questions you were getting?
Yeah, it looks like there's a couple questions in the Q&A. The first one was, is there another country that is putting out stronger, better policies in place versus the US? And is there a path forward without truly impacting revenues or passing those costs on to consumers?
Well, I think in Europe they do have a higher cost of carbon in different models. I don't think there's an international one that I can point to offhand. The second part of the question, though, what was that again?
Is there truly a path forward to decarbonization without impacting revenues or passing costs on to consumers?
Yeah, so no. I mean, the reality is, like, at the end of the day, someone has to pay for the work that needs to be done. I mean, these are physical assets. We're physically burning fossil fuels. We're physically, inhabiting physical buildings, and we need to change the physical built environment. And that requires work, and we need to pay for that. So to think, government subsidy is going to pay for it, it's possible, but that's still, someone has to pay for it. Whether those costs can be socialized enough to the point where a private, owner is feels good about the cost. I don't know, but I think it's likely to assume operating buildings is going to get more expensive.
I want to reframe that question, okay? Which is, the question was, is there a path forward that does not impact revenue, expenses, et cetera, right? From an owner's perspective, okay. Well, I would contend that every single time there is a climate disaster, you have an impact on your income and expenses and revenue. So if you happen to live in an area of the country where that doesn't happen, show me that area of the country. So I would contend that unbeknownst to that person asking the question or implying that space, they are facing impacts. So over time, those impacts will excel. Now, the path forward is, if we want to accelerate the speed in which we do this, then we get to Darien's question, which is we need to create a opportunity through either lower cost of capital from an investor space, both debt and equity, incentives from a governmental perspective, incentives from a third-party market of carbon, et cetera. Something within those, kind of components together to accelerate the timeline. But if we don't do anything, we'll have an issue worldwide. But, we will face costs as an ownership group, of which I own buildings, and we will face significant costs every year as we go forward, and climate disasters increase more and more and more.
Okay, thank you. And there was a second question. I just want to be cognizant of time because we only have just a couple minutes left. So the second question was, can anyone speak to or any thoughts on the success of Fannie Mae Green Bonds program? Yeah, I mean, they had a second which was our GSE is necessary as part of the solution. So
I can speak to it. It was very successful for what the need was at the time of those, when that program came into place, and as is today. But the definition of what qualified for green in the beginning and what qualified for green, that just changed, by the way, 18 months ago, something like that. Probably will change again. As the need increases, the requirement to be green needs to increase. And frankly, they need to get ahead of the curve. So I would say it was very successful. But if you were to compare the standard for green bonds today of what the need is for the space, it's not deep enough.
Got it. Great. Okay. Well, I think that those are the only couple of questions I saw in the Q&A. So I just wanted to thank everyone for their time today. This was great. Thank you so much, Donnell. On your point about Hopin, they are the definition of a unicorn, $7 billion valuation in under 2 years. So you might lose shorting that investment. But I agree.
So was WeWork. WeWork was valued at $37 billion.
Sure, absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
Thank you so much.
I'm going to go on and hop out. Thanks, everybody. Bye-bye.
Thanks, y'all.
Thank you very much. I just put my
Thank
email
you.
in the chat if anybody's trying to get a hold of me. It's right there. Thank you so much, everybody. Thanks, Manav and Sheppard for organizing this. Take care.
Thanks, everybody.